We've been listening to senators grill Judge Barrett on her position on various legal decisions, including gay marriage, fetal rights, the Affordable Care Act, and Second Amendment rights for felons. Let's bring in our panel now to discuss further. CBS Evening News anchor and managing editor Norah O'Donnell, CBS News chief legal correspondent Jan Crawford, CBS News chief congressional correspondent Nancy Cordes on Capitol Hill, and CBS News legal contributor Rebecca Riophe. Welcome to all of you. Norah, let me start with you. What distinctions are we seeing so far between the way Democrats and Republicans are approaching this hearing?
Well, it's falling right along party lines. I mean, this is happening right just less 20 days before a presidential election, and never before has a confirmation fight happened this close to a presidential election. And so you see a number of the senators bringing up what's not only important in their own home states, but also essentially what will turn out their particular constituencies. We saw it from the chairman at the very beginning, Lindsey Graham, talking about the Affordable Care Act, what people in South Carolina, he said people don't want Obamacare, they want South Carolina care. So this is all viewed through the lens and through the politics. But I think from Amy Coney Barrett, what you hear is a very skilled, a very likable jurist, the mother of 7 there, who's even Senator Dianne Feinstein praising that her children were sitting there paying attention for the first part of this. But you see that she is resisting the female Scalia label. She says, you won't get a Justice Scalia, you'll get a Justice Barrett. I'm my own woman, essentially, my own person, she's saying. She's refusing also to say if she'll recuse herself on the hearing and ruling on the Affordable Care Act, or if there was an election dispute. And she's also saying that her Catholic beliefs will not affect her rulings. So I haven't seen really any big surprises, you know, other than she is very deftly handling these questions by the senators.
And Jan, Judge Barrett has, of course, faced comparisons and distinctions with her former mentor, the late Justice Scalia. Let's play her exchange with Senate Judiciary Committee Chairman Lindsey Graham.
I would say that Justice Scalia was obviously a mentor. And as I said when I accepted the president's nomination, that his philosophy is mine too. You know, he was a very eloquent defender of originalism. And that was also true of textualism, which is the way that I approach statutes and their interpretation. And similarly to what I just said about originalism, for textualism, the judge approaches the text as it was written with the meaning it had at the time and doesn't infuse her own meaning into it. But I want to be careful to say that if I'm confirmed, you would not be getting Justice Scalia, you would be getting Justice Barrett.
So, Jan, she has to be careful there, obviously.
Originalist agree.
Yeah, no, I mean, Norah and I, when she said that, I mean, Norah and I were like, oh, that's, you know, don't assume, in other words, that you're going to get Justice Scalia. And when she's talking about, as Norah was saying, originalism and that theory of judicial interpretation, obviously she shares those views, but sometimes justices who say they're originalists can come out in very different ways. I think Chief Justice John Roberts would say that he is an originalist, and then look how differently he has seen issues from Justice Scalia or certainly from Justice Thomas. I thought it was really interesting, too, when she was talking about, and in some ways, Lindsey Graham gave us kind of this opportunity to present her personal views some more. We saw her start doing that yesterday when she talked about, you know, she's aware of the caricatures that people are making about her and explaining, you know, why she isn't going to rely on her religion, why she is bound by the rule of law, and why that is so important to her, why she decided to put herself and her family through this, knowing how excruciating it was going to be for them, but that anyone who sat in that chair was going to have to go through it, and so why shouldn't it be her to serve her country? I thought that was a pretty powerful moment and really smart of the chairman, Lindsey Graham, to kick off the hearings that way, just to let her talk. Because once you get to the Democratic side, as they said going into this hearing, this was going to be their chance to make the case to the American people. To Norah's point, this is a lot about the issues that voters care about. So in some ways, what we're seeing is a recitation of issues that voters might have in the back of their minds when they go cast those ballots, or in many cases have already started casting ballots.
And Nancy, I want to turn to you. We've heard from 2 Republicans so far who are up for re-election, Senator Graham and Texas's John Cornyn. From a political standpoint, what are these lawmakers focusing on in these hearings that can help them?
Well, you heard Lindsey Graham talk right off the top about how he wanted to have South Carolina care rather than Obamacare, talking about the fact that his state doesn't get as much money via Obamacare as some other states. So clearly making the case that he's putting his state first. Now, part of the reason that South Carolina doesn't get as much money is because the state itself opted not to expand Medicaid as it was allowed under Obamacare. That's part of the reason that federal dollars don't go that state's way. If it did decide to expand Medicaid, it would get a lot more money. Nevertheless, Graham also managed to slip in at another point that he golfs with President Trump quite a lot. And that was clearly a nod to a lot of conservative voters in his state who are very supportive of President Trump. Just a reminder that he is very close with the man in charge. But beyond that, just the fact that this hearing is taking place is a way for these senators who are running for re-election to get some much needed attention at a time when it is very difficult to conduct the standard campaign event. We're living in a COVID world where you can't really, unless you're President Trump or want to go that route, have big rallies with lots of people packed in, do a lot of glad handing at various locations in your state. And so this is another way for them to get on television and to show the people of their state that they are doing the work of the Senate at a time when they're looking to get as much attention as possible right before the election.
And Rebecca, Judge Barrett has referred back to respecting precedent and refused to give answers on how she'd rule in particular cases, as we said earlier. I want to play how she responded to Ranking Member Dianne Feinstein on abortion laws. Let's listen.
Do you agree with Justice Scalia's view that Roe was wrongly decided?
Senator, I completely understand why you are asking the question, but again, I can't pre-commit or say, yes, I'm going in with some agenda, because I'm not. I don't have any agenda. I have no agenda to try to overrule Casey. I have an agenda to stick to the rule of law and decide cases as they come.
And so, Rebecca, what do we know about her stance on precedent? And is it appropriate in a Supreme Court hearing for her to weigh in on her stances?
Well, I mean, this is a complicated question. One thing is it goes back to what we were talking about before about her judicial philosophy, which is originalism. And the thing about originalism is it purports to constrain a judge by the original public meaning of the Constitution. But in fact, it can actually justify a very activist stance on judges. And so many originalist judges are very willing to overrule precedent in the name of the original public meaning of the Constitution. And of course, in reality, it's extremely hard to say what the Constitution meant at the time it was ratified. And so there are at least allegations that sometimes conservative judges read their policy preferences into those analyses of the original public meaning, and thus justify an extremely activist stance in which they overrule precedent, and they often declare certain statutes unconstitutional, and so are in fact replacing the popular will with the view of their own particular policy preferences. Now, this is an important question. So will she use that originalist stance to overturn precedent, or will she respect that precedent? And I think, you know what, she, like every recent nominee, has refused to say. There's just no advantage to committing one way or another on that point. But it is something to be aware of, that somebody who is an originalist, who views themselves that way, is more willing to overturn precedent than a different kind of judge. So accumulated wisdom over years can be catapulted in favor of a particular view of the meaning of the Constitution. And as she herself said, that is a contested thing. It is not easy to decide what our founders meant when they wrote these words. It's not easy to say how people interpreted them at the time. And therefore, it is open, as every kind of judicial philosophy is, to a certain influence by what your policy preferences are. And it's no advantage of her to say what those are, because that will just, that will just alarm people and throw, wrenches into this, a process that seems to be going in her direction.
Very, very important point there, Rebecca. Nancy, I want to turn to you. You have something you want to add about the judge's response to the Roe v. Wade question?
Sure. You know, on abortion rights and several other issues today, she has invoked what she and others have described as the Ginsburg rule, which Judge Ginsburg, whose seat she would be filling, the late Judge Ginsburg, said in her confirmation hearing that you shouldn't give any hints, any clues about how you would rule. And so using that precedent, Judge Barrett has said, you know, she can't say how she would rule in an abortion case or on Obamacare or gay rights or any other issue. But I went back to Judge Ginsburg's confirmation hearing all those years ago, and she actually did state very clearly how she felt about abortion rights. She said it's essential to women's equality that she be the decision maker, that her choice be controlling. If you impose restraints that impede her choice, you're disadvantaging her because of her sex. So possibly because Ginsburg was already on the record about this issue as a sort of crusader for women's rights in the years before she was nominated, she was very open about where she stood on abortion. And by contrast, Amy Coney Barrett, who too is on the record, she has signed ads in newspapers embracing the right to life and the fact that life begins at conception. She has not been nearly as forthcoming about her position, and that may be possibly because, as Rebecca pointed out, times have changed and there really is no benefit at this point to saying where you stand on just about anything.
Right, for sure. And Norah, we saw lawmakers, including Senators Chuck Grassley and Patrick Leahy, ask Judge Barrett the crucial question that so many lawmakers there were waiting to hear. Had she spoken to the president about how she would rule on any issue, but particularly the Affordable Care Act or the 2020 election? And she responded, absolutely not. Remind us why this is so significant.
That's an excellent point, Tanya, because I think the question is that Judge Barrett is being chosen as a rubber stamp for President Trump, you know, that she would automatically rule in his favor if there were an election dispute. As the president has indicated, he wants pro-life judges, and that she would immediately overturn Roe versus Wade. And she said essentially that she has made no commitments and not spoken about those specific issues with the president of the United States. And generally speaking, that would usually signal a death knell for any candidate if they'd had that conversation with the president, because this usually comes up at the confirmation hearings. But I do want to return to the abortion question, because what Senator Feinstein said she was disappointed in with Judge Barrett is that Judge Barrett wouldn't speak about Casey v. Planned Parenthood, which is the case that happened after Roe versus Wade. And here's exactly what Judge Barrett said. She said, I don't have an agenda to try to overrule Casey. I have an agenda to stick to the rule of law and decide cases as they come. Why is Casey important? Because Casey essentially has established that you can't impose undue burden standard for abortion restrictions. So that case in Pennsylvania was essentially that you had to check in with your husband before you had an abortion. Well, they struck that down. They kept some other restrictions in place that like parental consent, for instance. And so the question really, I think, and Rebecca probably knows this better, and certainly Jan does, the question really before the Supreme Court is not striking down the right to abortion. The question really that is going to be coming and has come before the Supreme Court is about these restrictions on abortion. Well, that's what's been in these lower courts, is what constitutes an undue burden. And I think that's really what most people are concerned about, is the number of states that only have one abortion clinic, the further restrictions that are put on women in order to get an abortion. And isn't that really where the fight is?
Well, Judge Barrett herself has said in speeches that she didn't think the Supreme Court would overturn Roe versus Wade, which obviously would imply the same for Casey as well, but it would be in the restrictions. And if we think about the current membership of the Supreme Court, I mean, obviously Justice Thomas would overturn Roe, but it's hard to see, maybe Alito, but it's hard to see who else. We're a long way from 5 votes right now, even if she is confirmed.
But you know what I'm saying? I think that debate is misplaced.
It is right now. It's in the restrictions.
It's about how hard it is to get an abortion.
And the argument there would be that at some point, if you just keep knocking the legs off the table, the whole table is going to fall. I mean, it's going to be impossible in many states for a woman to get an abortion if you continue to allow these restrictions. But I agree with that. And, you know, she is really following along the same lines as many other nominees, going back really to Justice O'Connor, have done, saying that, you know, no forecasts, no hints. It's often referred to as the Ginsburg rule, but it started with Justice O'Connor in 1981. I did think it was interesting when she was talking about abortion in that exchange with Feinstein, she said she was going to follow what Justice Kagan did. Kagan didn't give her thoughts on abortion either. Justice Ginsburg was a slightly different nominee because she devoted her entire career to defending reproductive rights and women's rights, often in the Supreme Court, women's rights. So she was a little different, and I thought that was pretty deft how Judge Barrett referred to Kagan in that exchange and not Justice Ginsburg. On originalism,
Well, Norah
I'll keep
O'Donnell,
talking.
Jan
I'll keep talking.
Yes, we could keep
point to
going.
make on originalism.
Please,
it's kind of hard, I know, when we're all in different boxes and in different places. The originalism, I mean, that's, conservatives say that that's the way that they allow these key issues that aren't in the words of the Constitution to be decided by the democratic process, by the legislatures at the state and federal level. So, if it's not in the words of the Constitution and as the Constitution, was meant at the time publicly, then they're just going to say, Congress, you take care of it, or state legislatures, you do it. And I thought the way she explained that was interesting, to say, nobody wants to know what the law of Amy is. It's not the law of Amy, and my kids don't even want to know that. Live under the law of Amy, meaning Amy Barrett, live here under the laws of, yeah.
All right. Well, Norah O'Donnell, Jan Crawford, Nancy Cordes, and Rebecca Riophe, thanks to all of you for joining us.